So far we've just covered how do you actually manipulate and express associations sort of at the level of active record models. But we don't have just models. We also have views and controllers. So a question is, what support do you get in terms of your controllers, your routes, your views, and so forth for representing these same kinds of relationships? Right? And this is kind of related to the question that was just asked, which is when you're creating a new review, how to keep track of the movie and moviegoer with whom it'll be associated sort of in terms of the model view controller flow. Because you need to know this stuff at the moment you do the create. So we already know that if we declare movie as a resource, we get route helpers like new movie path that will resolve to the correct RESTful URI. Remember that's that one line we can put in the routes file saying, please give me all of the standard RESTful actions on this object. But now life is a little more complicated because we would like movies to also be associated with other things. And it turns out that you can automatically generate routes and other support, route helpers, and whatever that mirror that relationship. So instead of just saying resources movies, suppose we say resources movies, and then we have a do block inside of which is resources reviews. This basically says reviews are also a resource, but they're a resource that belongs to a movie in the sense that it's meaningless to talk about a review without talking about which movie owns it. So I am nesting the resource of reviews inside the resource of movies. And now Rails will build for us additional route helpers and all of the other RESTful stuff that reflects that relationship. Because now the routes will allow us to express right in the route itself that not only is this a review, but it's a review associated with a particular movie. Let's see how that works. If we added that line in our routes file, and then I ran rake routes, which displays all of the routes that are defined, notice what's different now. All the routes that have to do with reviews have the word movie somewhere in front of them, because we've nested the review resource inside the movie resource. It's not just a review path. It is a movie review path for some movie and some review. Right? So now there's actually two things that are going to come out of the route that are stuck into params for you. You'll get, in the case of looking at edit movie review path as an example, part of the URI will be the owning movie ID, and part of the URI will be the ID of the primary resource in question, which in this case is a review. So as before, params ID will refer to the primary resource that the operation is about, but you'll also get the ID of the owning object, basically what the foreign key would be in the association. So this lets you construct a route and pass the route around. Think of why this is important. At every step in a controller where you're manipulating a review, and you need to know what movie it belongs to, the route itself is carrying that information around. Right? It's sort of carrying it around for you for free. So that also means, excuse me, that when you generate these paths, right, no longer are you just saying, I need the path for a new review. It's the path for a new review that would belong to a certain movie. Right? So the syntax of the routes is very similar to what you've seen. But in addition to the ID of the primary resource, the route can also now include the ID of the owning resource. You do not have to do it this way. You could just have movies and reviews each be a flat resource and have your own mechanism for essentially passing around what the movie ID should be. But it's, I think from a RESTful sort of philosophy point of view, it's much nicer if just looking at the route basically tells you a review is a thing that is associated with a movie in a way that doesn't make sense to separate. Right? We never talk about a review without also talking about which movie is it for. And if you're wondering, yes, you can actually have double sets of routes where you can get to the same review either through its movie route or through its moviegoer route. You can declare them both. So what does it look like to use this stuff? Here's what the revised controller action might look like for creating a new review. So if we're in the create action, up there on the post, that's a reminder of how we got here. Right? That's what the route would have looked like. For creating a new review, the review itself does not yet have an ID because we haven't created it. But the route includes the ID of the owning movie, right? And that is available from the route as params movie ID. So that's what's going to give you the movie from which you're going to build the review on top of. Right? In this example, I am not yet dealing with movie also belonging to moviegoer. I'm just dealing with the relationship between movies and reviews. So I create the new review. I know what foreign key it's going to have because I have already easily looked up which movie it's going to belong to because the route itself carries that information now. Very cool. And now, as usual, I can try to save it. If everything goes well, then I can redirect to somewhere. Where am I redirecting to? Well, in this case, I've chosen to redirect to the list of all reviews for that movie. Remember that in a non-nested resource, I can't cover both of these, but if reviews were not nested inside movie, reviews path all by itself would just be the list of all reviews. Now that it is nested inside the movie resource, movie reviews path is all the reviews for that particular movie. Which movie? Now the route helper needs an argument. Right? So it's the same. Just like with simple resources, you can go in both directions. You can say, give me the RESTful routes for doing various things to reviews, but now they're always conditioned on belonging to a particular movie, which means that I need to tell the route generator which movie it's about. Was there? Yes?
What if I wanted to, like, what if you did it this way with the association, but like you still wanted to get all the reviews listed out regardless of the movie? Like, what would you do?
OK, so the question was, suppose you do everything I just said, but you also want the ability to just list all reviews, like all reviews ever, regardless of which movie they belong to. So there's a couple of things you could do. One of them is in your routes file, you could separately say resources reviews. So it's perfectly legal to have multiple routes that end up mapping to the same controller action. You could also just separately define a one-off route, right? So in addition to having your reviews nested inside the movies, you could also separately define a route. You could call it something like, all reviews. And all it does is route to an action that just gets all the reviews irrespective of anything and doesn't care about the movie ID. So there's a couple of ways to do it. Right? The goal of the RESTful routes is not that they solve 100% of your route problems, but it's that they cover the most common operations, even in cases where there's a relationship between the objects. Right? That's the thing that's new here is you can still maintain the idea of basic RESTful operations, but not lose the idea that there's a hierarchical relationship between the objects that you're referring to. So that's basically the answer to your question. A couple of different ways to do it. OK, so does this make sense to people? Do we understand why, in this case, we need to pass, to go back to the list of reviews for the movie that we just built a new review for, why we have to pass the movie as an argument to the route helper, right? Because the route that is going to result from this is going to look something like /movies / the ID of this thing / reviews. And then when the index action in the controller gets that route, it can do the same trick. It can pull the movie ID out and say, OK, now I can just say movie.reviews of this, and that's the list that I'm going to display. What about building a new movie? So somewhere you're going to have a form, the user fills in or a new review, excuse me. Somewhere you're going to have a form where the user fills in the number of potatoes and some other stuff. So again, here's a reminder of what that route typically looks like. We'll grab the ID of the movie for which we want to build a new review, because it's part of the route, which is great. We can set review to be a new copy of a review. So the review doesn't have anything in it except for the correct foreign key. That will allow, which, by the way, this line is basically functionally equivalent to doing this. Right? And I'll explain in a moment why you would do it this way. But essentially what we're doing is we're going to create a blank copy of a review that's going to serve as the basis of the fill-in form. The only thing about it that is not blank is that it will have the correct movie ID in it. And the route, once the template is actually rendered, there's a form that's going to be submitted. The submit on that form is going to have a submit button that creates the post route with the movie ID embedded in it as well. So it's all of the same mechanisms that apply to a flat namespace resource, but they're extended so that you can have one resource nested inside another. The routes, the submission forms for the routes for the submissions of forms, basically all of that stuff gets extended in the same way. why am I doing this? An idiom that you will see in a lot of apps. Suppose that the user fills in that form and movie creation in the create action ends up failing. You actually want to be able to, in the create action, redirect back to the same form that the user filled in. Doing something like double or equals means that if there were already values the user had filled in for the review, they will persist. So the user doesn't have to fill in all of the stuff that actually was legal. Okay, so you'll often see one of these two lines as an idiom rather than just assigning to a blank new review. It'll assign it only if it hasn't already been assigned. It's kind of a standard way to recover from an error, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. The main thing that I want you to get from this is that every action, create, new, etc., is now extensible because we know the ID of the owning resource. That means that we can populate the form submit button properly, and that the movie ID value will sort of always be carried around. Right? That's the main idea. Another idiom you will see, we talked about before filters or before actions on controllers. If you know that every operation you're ever going to do on a review counts on having this nested route with a movie ID in it, you could actually write a little function like this one, whose only purpose in life is to set at movie to whatever the movie ID is in the route. Right? So this is expecting the route to be in this nested format. And now just say, run this lookup movie action before every single controller action. Basically, that allows the controller actions to assume that at the moment they are entered, at movie has already been set to the owning movie of this review, and they don't have to do that themselves. Right? So when we introduced before filters on Tuesday, the main motivation for them was preventing a controller action that shouldn't run. But this is another thing you can do. If the controller actions are inside of a controller that manipulates a nested resource, the before action can save some work by looking up the ID of the nested resource. So you can do that. This is an idiom that you'll see as well. OK, so basic questions about how the routes and controllers. It's like I said, as you start seeing and playing with this code, you'll get more comfortable with it. But it's really just a straightforward extension of how routes already work for simple resources that are not nested. OK, and then the last thing is, what can you do in the views? So we've already seen that there are these nice form tag helpers where you can pass the RESTful route that becomes part of the form submit. So same thing here, except that now, if we're editing a review, it's not just the we don't pass only the review instance to the route helper. We also have to pass the movie instance, because we want the submit to actually include both of those things, right? So if we have a movie review path, then it implies that there's two resources in question here. The primary one is the review itself, but the owning resource, the movie, is the one that we want to sort of keep in the URI, be able to keep passing its ID around. So the form tag helpers, the same way that you use them for doing basic operations on a simple resource, they're extended here. You just need to pass them the additional argument. All reviews for this movie looks like movie reviews path, but now you need to pass the movie object in order to tell it which movie to get the reviews from. And as with all these helpers, you don't have to do it. But if you use these mechanisms consistently, they actually save you a lot of lines of code, because they sort of help with the invariant that anytime you're manipulating a review, you sort of have to have the movie be carried around with it. Otherwise, you have no way to construct the submit actions. You have no way to construct the index action. So if you don't use the helpers, you leave yourself vulnerable to the possibility that you need some other way to pass that information around. Right, so as with so many other things, I realize we're throwing a lot at you in a short amount of time. But if you're browsing either the legacy code for your own project, or if any of you have actually tried to look at the open GitHub repos for some of the past projects, you'll see this all over the place. If you want to look for some examples, the easiest thing is to find projects where the routes.rb file has some nested resources in it, and then take a look at those controllers and see how they manipulate the nested resource. And it has to do with referential integrity. We didn't talk about this. So we had talked about the idea of X has many Ys, right? And we kept going back to our example of movies and reviews. And we never asked what happens if you delete a movie and that movie had some reviews already associated with it. what should happen, logically, what should happen to the reviews. So from the point of view of using the app, what's the right behavior? And what are the ways that you express that behavior in terms of the code? Now, in terms of the code, what's going on? If you delete a particular movie, then by default, any reviews that had movie ID's foreign key as the key for that movie all of a sudden refer to something non-existent. And you could sort of predict what this is going to do code-wise, right? You have a review, you say review.movie, and you get an error because it's trying to do a database lookup for something that doesn't exist. Which, is, by the way, is different from the review not being associated with a movie. That would mean that its foreign key for movie ID doesn't have any value, and then Rails knows that the movie associated with it should just be nil. But this is actually saying it has a movie associated with it, and then that movie ID gets looked up, and it's not found. That is actually an error. And by the way, this is another reason that primary keys never get recycled, right? You wouldn't want movie ID to refer to some new movie that happened to inherit the ID of one that was deleted a long time ago. So what can you do? It depends on what the app is supposed to do, but if the goal is when a movie is deleted, all of its owned objects, in this case reviews, should also be deleted, you can add, when you say has many reviews, you can add this qualifier that says dependent destroy. That means that if the movie gets deleted, automatically without you doing anything, all of the reviews associated with it also get deleted. So that ensures that you will never have a review whose movie ID has a value that corresponds to no existing row in the movies table. That's one possibility. Or perhaps the possibility you want to keep those reviews around, but you want to avoid having the review try to dereference its owning movie and getting an error. In that case, you can add dependent nullify, which basically means when a movie is deleted, any reviews that have movie ID as that movie, those keys will be nilled out. So you can still access the review, but if you say review.movie, you'll just get back nil, not an error, right? So the correct behavior depends on the app. You're probably asking, if you say neither of these things, which behavior is the default? And I'll tell you, I don't remember. But if it was me, I'd look it up. The safe thing is to have one or the other clearly marked, because that also makes it clear when someone is reading the code, right? In terms of cognitive load, it's nice to know what this actually means. By the way, there is a third possibility, which is you never allow a movie to be deleted at all. In that case, it doesn't really matter which one you do, because the problem that this solves will never arise. But in most cases, it's worth worrying about.